All right, friends, we're about to get started with the fireside conversation. So I'm having a little bit of feelies here, because I never thought I'd be introducing one of my favorite thinkers of our times. There are few people who have the ability to chart the complexity of our times and what it means to have a spiritual experience in the 21st century, like Jamie Wheal. Jamie Wheal is a neuroanthropologist, Pulitzer Prize nominated author. His work has appeared in the Financial Times, TED, many other outlets. He's also has an incredible Substack. He's publishing regularly, and I highly recommend checking it out, the Homegrown Human Substack. You can also find him at the Flow Genome Project, where he conducts transformative experiences for helping people tap into changing their hardware. So with that, I'll give it to Jamie Wheal.
Thanks, folks. All right. A quick show of hands. Who is just visiting Austin for South by? Hands up in the air. All right, and who are longtime crusty locals? Raise your hand. All right. Well, welcome. So, I'm just about to introduce Rick Doblin from MAPS, who probably needs no introduction at an event like this. And Dr. Bruce Damer, who is the founder of Minds. These are two fascinating and parallel organizations that are looking to do with psychedelics what we apparently have been unable to do socially and politically. So just to name this moment, we're in super interesting and novel times right now. The old maps of the last 75 years have just been set on fire, and where we go from here is entirely dependent on us. So today, we just want to presence that, right? This is South by, it's a fun week, it's springtime, right? But the world turns, and the world burns. So I'd like to invite Rick and Bruce up on stage, and please give them a big hand. Thanks, man. Thank you. Come on up. And as you guys may well know, MAPS' dedicated mission is into healing the world through therapeutic interventions with psychedelics. And Minds, Dr. Bruce Damer's work, who's a NASA astrobiologist who has pioneered the most recent and pervasive thesis of the origins of life, and it was in hot springs, and he has an amazing story to tell that may or may not involve ayahuasca on how he came to that profound breakthrough. So we're looking at two things. We're looking at healing via psychedelics, and we're looking at innovation through psychedelics. So with that, we're going to jump into a conversation. Think of this as a little fireside chat, and we'd love to turn it over to you, Rick, first, to just share a little bit about where MAPS is today versus maybe where we were in Denver a couple of summers ago. So give us your State of your Union.
Yeah. Okay, well, first off, I'm so glad you all are here and that we're here as well. I do want to expand a little bit on what Jamie just said, is that we're about healing. That is our key strategy, but we have parallel strategy. The first is about doing medical research, trying to make the case that psychedelics with therapy can be helpful to people, but then the second is drug policy reform. So that the idea is that the drug war is counterproductive and that there's a lot more going on than healing. This is what we're going to hear from Bruce. There's a lot of insights, there's a lot of celebration, there's a lot of couples therapy for MDMA that's not necessarily healing, so that MAPS is really trying to get access to psychedelics in legal ways through drug policy reform for everybody for any purpose that they want to choose to use it. And so it's sometimes difficult for people to understand. On the one hand, we're very focused on psychedelics for particular patients by highly trained therapists covered by insurance. And at the second, we're also sympathetic and supportive the idea that people should be able to access these substances without having to have a medical diagnosis or without having to go to a psychedelic church just for our own personal curiosity, exploration, to feel love, to feel connection, to feel spirituality, that those are parallel. So where we're at when we were at the Psychedelic Science in 2023 was this moment of real hopeful exuberance. And what shocked us was that there was 12,400 people came to Denver. And the single most largest group of all the people that came were therapists. And a lot of these therapists were really looking forward to being able to incorporate psychedelics, particularly MDMA, into their practice. Then what happened is that our expectations were dashed, that we were crushed. The FDA rejected approving MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. They didn't say they'll never approve it. In fact, they said, we want to see more research. We will eventually, potentially approve it, but we want to continue. We're not persuaded by your data. I think that there was a lot of confusion created about our data. I think our data is solid, and so what we're actually facing now is that we had lost control of the narrative, that the pharma company that we were involved with wasn't really proactive about explaining that when things are new and they're innovative, you cannot be silent. You have to keep educating. The FDA's never done psychedelic-assisted therapy, so we really need to explain how that could be done. And so even being here today, and what we're trying to do with media, with documentaries, other ways, is to tell the story in a different way, in a way that really resonates with people. But a big part of what we need to do now is to review all of the data that's been gathered. The FDA has said that we're not sure that we trust it, and so there's going to be probably a 6-month process of evaluating the data, independent people reviewing it, trying to see, are there unreported adverse events, or did people get pressured to report that their results were better than they really were? And so I think what's going to happen, and I hesitate to use this word, but there's a fork in the road coming. and and so one is that if we do this work, evaluate the data, independent raters say that it's reliable, then I think there's a chance that in 6 months or so now, the FDA could say, yes, they approve MDMA for prescription use, but they might require what are called phase 4 studies. Those are studies that are done after a drug is approved to gather additional information about real life experience, about safety, durability, things like that. Or what could happen is we do this independent review. Even if it says everything is reliable, it's possible the FDA could say, well, you need another phase 3 study. And if that's the case, then approval is delayed for 3 years. So these are the two things that we face. And then we have another conference coming up in June, the 16th to the 20th, where we're bringing the field together again. We'd like to invite you all to that. It's going to be really, really exciting, but it's going to be a lot on more what were lessons learned and how do we move forward. Whereas there was this incredible exuberance before, now there's more a sober reflection of what I underestimated was the depth of the fear in the culture for psychedelics, and even more importantly, for what psychedelics bring to the surface, which is our traumas, our feelings. That's really, I think, at the heart of things, is that psychedelics in therapy provide an opportunity to really deal with things that people have been unable to deal with before. And so I think that's the deeper fear of psychedelics, is what they bring to the surface within us. And how do we address that? I think, again, this idea is that we need to really address it in combination with therapy. The real key is not the drug. So Tom Insel was the former head of the National Institute of Mental Health for quite a lot of years. And between the FDA advisory committee saying no and the FDA saying no, Tom put out an op-ed sort of, and what he said is that the main innovation of MAPS was not trying to make MDMA into a medicine. It was trying to combine MDMA plus therapy, that was the innovation, that we're trying to bring something new through the FDA that has never been brought before, psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And we have the alternative example of Spravato, which was made by Johnson & Johnson, and it's ketamine. It has a lot of benefits, but it was approved without any therapy. And so what happens when you try ketamine without therapy? The results fade pretty quickly, and what happens? You need more therapy. You need more ketamine. And then you need more ketamine, and that's good for the pharma company. When you combine ketamine with therapy, the results are more durable, but you don't need as much ketamine, and then more money goes to the therapist rather than to the drug company. So even though ketamine becoming a medicine has been a real breakthrough and has helped lots and lots of people, I don't think it's optimized for what's best for patients. It's been optimized for what's best for the pharma company. And I think what we're trying to do with Lykos being a public benefit pharma company, I think the core thing should be what's best for patients, and that means really standing by drug plus therapy. And I think thank you. It's really important, because I think the message that the for-profit companies have come to with psychedelics is many of them have said we need to abandon the therapy. The FDA had problems with therapy. FDA doesn't regulate therapy. It's also the case that the FDA doesn't regulate medicine. FDA approves drugs, and then prescribers, doctors can prescribe it for things that it wasn't approved for. That's called the practice of medicine. So what we're thinking of is that people get trained in the therapeutic method that we used in phase 3, but then they're free to do whatever they want. That's the point. Therapists have all sorts of different backgrounds, and the main thing to think about is that MDMA is just a tool. Psychedelics are just a tool, and you can use it in many different ways. And so we have one therapeutic approach, but people can use it with other therapeutic approaches, and we've actually funded studies to combine MDMA with prolonged exposure, cognitive processing therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. And I'll just say a last word, which is that I think one of the big areas of learning that we're going to have to do, particularly as we try to globalize access to really high trauma, low resource countries, is group therapy. And we really need to know a lot more about group therapy. And so there are studies in multiple countries now looking at group therapy. And when we think about really scaling this internationally, like to Ukraine or to other places, there's a lot of places that don't have a lot of therapists and psychiatrists. So we have to find who are the local healers. How do we help educate them? What are the culturally relevant contexts? And that's what I'm really looking forward to. So my time, I believe that we're on a great track to eventually getting FDA approval for MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, either in 6 months or 3 years. And now I'm focusing a lot on the globalization and access in that way. So it's still optimistic. We're still moving forward. But I've described it as the phoenix, the myth of the phoenix. So with the rejection by FDA, we were burnt to a crisp. And now we're starting to reassemble a little bit from the ashes into what is the next steps.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you guys didn't know, this tonight is an explicit fundraiser for both MAPS and Minds, and the intention is to help really accelerate all of this good work into the world. And so, Rick, hearing your discussion, it seems to me that there's a theme here, which is that psychedelics for all of human history have been esoteric and part of closely guarded mystery schools, or as they broke into the West, via the culture and the community around the Grateful Dead, into Burning Man, into the sort of transformational festival diaspora, right? There's plenty of magic and mystery, and yet the decision to go not ceremonial route but medical access is pushing you into the empirical, double-blind, placebo-controlled space, and do we have the instrumentation to measure the magic? And so that really leaves me thinking on your side of the fence, Bruce, because Bruce, as a astrobiologist, publishing in peer-reviewed papers, ideas and ideation that is coming from realms that are somewhat off the res, right? How are you parsing? How are you explaining the physics of the metaphysics, and how are you sort of wrestling with the challenge of validation and credibility with some of the mysto and the places that some of these profound insights have been coming from?
Yeah, this is something new and very old. And I'm going to ask you two questions, if you don't mind. If you can respond by hooting or putting your hand up. When you were little, or even now, if you close your eyes to go to sleep, do you see color patterns or washes behind closed eyes for a while? Do you ever see that? So I saw that when I was 9 years old and was like, what? I thought my brother was shining flashlight in my face, and this is called hypnagogia or hypnagogia, and it was my gateway drug. So here's this autistic little boy at 9 years old discovers that he can turn and tune his consciousness, and that those color washes can be resolved into worlds. It's like, if I could shut down my thinking mind, and this is a 9-year-old, 1971, shut it all down, and then, oh my gosh, look at that, this flew across. And there's like a cable TV channel in here before cable TV was invented. That's how old I am. And it's like, wow. So from that age, I started to think there's a transmission. There's like a place that transmits to you, because the things that are crossing my field are so remarkable. It's not being made by my imagination. So I held that as possible. Then the second question, when you've had, say you jump out of an airplane, you have a real extreme experience, or you take 5 to 7 dried grams of something in silent darkness, and or do any kind of a thing that's extreme that takes you into an altered place. When you come back from it, are you in a kind of flowy state? Like, do you start having creative thoughts? Right? Does that happen? For me, it was like the combination of those two things. Wait a minute. I could have, oh my God, my internal TV channel just went crazy. So I had this experience, and this is before psychedelics. So I started having what I now call endo trips, endogenous trips that come from within, rather than an exo trip that comes from an external stimulus. And I was sort of brought up in the 70s, and sort of the war on drugs was sort of beginning. Your frying pan, the egg is your brain and everything. But that was mostly for Americans. Canadians were a little bit more chill. So anyway, it seemed to me like, I seem to be tripping on the natch, as Terence McKenna used to describe it. And so I just avoided everything. Like, frankly, an aspirin was like acid for me. I mean, it was like, oh my God, any kind of Robitussin. Oh, stay away from that. So I was like, what was that? TM especially. Oh no. So anyway, for us sensitive souls, so I avoided everything like the plague, and then I moved to Northern California. I'm so clueless that people were wearing black armbands, and I moved to the Santa Cruz Mountains. Like, why is everyone wearing black armbands? Oh, Jerry just died. It's like, Jerry who? Oh, Jerry Garcia. Who's that? So rapid fire ingestion of the local culture, discovering I moved to the psychedelic Shire. The bus further was parked right up the road, Ken Casey's World. So rolling forward, I realized now's the time. There's something called psychedelia. There's something called these worlds. I do virtual worlds online with avatars, big landscapes. And then this crazy guy wrote to me one day named Terence McKenna saying, I hear you do like avatars and virtual worlds. Can I come and visit you? So they came in, Ralph Abraham, Terence McKenna. I put him in front of cyberspace. And Finn McKenna actually has his son. And then he made a commitment. He will put me into hyperspace. So it was time. But I was 36 years old. But I discovered this amazing invisible landscape, this undiscovered country. It didn't crack my egg, although you may be the better judge of that. But what happened as a result, Terence and I had this all-night conversation of what is novelty, what is concrescence into novelty, and I had a whole bunch of training in this that he didn't have. So he listened, and then I heard his story in Whitehead and all these completely incomprehensible philosophers. But he then passed away. And as he passed away, he actually said, tell the story, keep telling the story, but make it your own story. So I took that up a few years later. And part of it was, what is going on, was his question. What is going on? And I took up the question of the ultimate concrescence into novelty, which was a transition from physics into the living world, the birth of the living world on the early Earth 4 billion years ago. And I had this new tool called psychedelics, or the elixirs, I call them, the elixirs for discovery. And I experimented for 10 years to try to find the right medicine, the right dose, settled on ayahuasca because I could titrate it, and then came down into this beautiful practice, 35 sessions, to get into the space where I could affect my own healing from the rupture of me being adopted right out at birth and not feeling mother's love. So I went to the Amazon rainforest and many, many sessions rebirthed myself. Then having then cleared, and this is where the clear flow starts, right? So that's a big one. Finding the embryo of you to rebirth, you get really clear when you've re-resolved something like that. And so I got all excited, my underpants were on fire, And I said to Mama Aya, would you like to go back to the birth of us all, including you? The first organism, the first single-celled organism. Because I have all the science loaded in my head. We've done all this work on self-assembling polymers and protocells in the lab, but we've only gotten so far. And I went on an endo trip. I started an endo trip inside of a psychedelic trip, rapid loading an endo trip that I'd done previously with science into the exo world of Mama Aya, and she's along for the ride. Like we're in the same robo-taxi, getting transported 4 billion years back into the ether, into this undiscovered country of this warm little pool where there are protocells floating, but they're vivid, they're fully realized. And all of this is I'm telling you this story because it's the capacity of the turned on monkey brain to go to places and find truths and find solutions that is really unresearched. It's under the table throughout our culture. And coming with that solution, seeing that first protocell pulling itself apart, and that was me pulling myself apart, the scream of the stillbirth, and then seeing the polymers dance, bringing that back down into science, into peer-reviewed journal papers, and then going to hot springs in Iceland and Yellowstone with a pipetter and a huge sack of chemicals and doing it in the hot spring, bending over real hot pools for hours and days and doing wet-dry cycling and forming those very same protocells. And I kept very quiet about this, and coming to the center of minds, I didn't want to disturb my science and get kicked off NASA review panels and risk my reputation, such as it was, until 2022. It was 10 years in, published on the cover of journals, and suddenly it was time to go public. And I did this for you. I did this to say that I can be an avatar for this practice. This practice is just very old and probably goes back to Eleusis and before and before and before. That the insight coming from vision, from healing comes revealing, gave us civilization itself perhaps. It gave us some of those breathtaking science, whether it was produced with an endogenous experience or an exogenous experience. The transformative visionary state is something that we can cultivate. And so I told my story in 2022 at a conference with Dennis McKenna, Terrence's brother, and it went public, met Ford and Sylvia 2 months later, who are the sponsors of this wonderful gathering, and sparks flew, and they decided to incubate the Center for Minds, which is modeled on MAPS roughly. We start with multidisciplinary investigations into novel discoveries and solutions, bringing them and landing them. And getting the research that was abandoned in the 60s back online, the Harman Fadiman study of the professionals that Michael Pollan describes in his book. Getting this research back online, and we just funded our first 3-year study at UT Austin on psilocybin and its effect on memory. It's fantastic stuff, guys. So Minds is new, it's fresh, it's not 40-some years old, but we feel a strong affinity with MAPS. They've guided us a lot. And we want to just bring this. The last thing I'll point out is in the 1970 federal drug law, I think you can correct me, this will be my last point, it says something like no value to society for psychedelics. Like there's no...
Well, it says no currently accepted value.
No currently accepted value to society. So the last thought is, if you are the humans in The Lord of the Rings at the Battle of Helm's Deep, and you're fighting the orcs, so this is MAPS and all of the studies and all of the therapists and principal investigators trying to do the data, and you've got the FDA of the orcs, and they're just going at it. And it's not clear, it's not conclusive. What happens if Gandalf comes over the crest of the hill with an elvish army from a completely different place, right? The orcs look up and like, no planning for that. So what if psychedelia and these practices are validated through science and valorized within the heart of capitalism itself, in business, in invention labs, in design studios, in leadership, which is already happening under the table, and we say, this is value, it has produced value for our world, we're putting our hands up, we're standing up, and we're part of that elvish army, we will potentially push it over, we'll tip that balance.
All right. There we have it. There we have it. I wish that did not happen in our times, right? Yeah. So if we think about this, I mean, I think a question that I'm curious about is, where does this information come from? Like, after we've spent enough time, enough cycles, we're 50, 60, 70 years into this experiment, what is the domain that we repeatedly plumb under the influence of psychedelics? Because obviously 3 hits of acid does not a Nobel laureate make. And every kid on, Ket and Molly in the clubs doesn't heal their inner child. So we typically have this story we tell that psychedelics make us more ecologically aware. They expand our ocean, big 5 personality traits. We tend to be kinder, more collaborative, more innovative, more interesting, better human beings. And yet we have some known psychedelic users helming this current administration, and it doesn't always look super bodhisattvic from here. I mean, maybe, call me old-fashioned. Yeah. So, what is the compound? What are the humans? And how do we pass the optimal and most helpful relationship of those 2 things?
All right. Well, I think what we're learning is, here's a good example, because Bruce was talking about ayahuasca. So it turns out that there's an ayahuasca church, União de Vegetal, that's from Brazil. Their sacrament comes from the Amazon. And some of the leaders of the União de Vegetal align themselves with Bolsonaro and about the destruction of the Amazon. So how is it that people who are psychedelically informed with their sacrament coming from the Amazon could align themselves with someone who is not about protecting the Amazon? Well, the answer for me that I've wrestled with is that culture is more important than the psychedelic experience. Culture is how you interpret what happens to you. So the União de Vegetal, in order to survive, these are called syncretic religions. They've had to sort of harmonize with the dominant culture so that you have the Christian church in Brazil, and these cultures that have been using potentially for millennium ayahuasca then have to, for their survival, align themselves with the dominant power. And so they become sort of this combination of their indigenous beliefs and then the church. And so the União de Vegetal is hierarchical, homophobic, patriarchal, and like many religions, gets aligned with power rather than with the powerless. And so how we interpret things is through the culture, which is more dominant, I think, than the experience itself. So that can explain why there's a lot of people that have done psychedelics that don't seem to be doing what they can to protect the environment or other aspects of it. Another part, though, to get to your question, Jamie, where do these things come from? Where do these experiences come from? So we talk a lot about preparation, and you really need to prepare for a psychedelic trip. You need to understand what the drug will do. You need to understand who and build a therapeutic alliance. And you also have to do a lot of work on what are your issues. But once you've done all this preparation, then the next thing to do is throw out your list of what you're going to do. And then you're open to whatever comes. So the preparation is good, but then you just open up to what's emerging. So where does it emerge from? So we all do know that our bodies heal themselves, that our body has this energy to restore itself. You get a cut, it gets fixed. You know, there's limits to it. We cannot regrow an arm. Some animals can regrow, like starfish, can regrow arms, but we cannot do that. But there's a general sense that we are trying to go back towards wholeness. And I think that there's this parallel process in the psyche, in the unconscious, this sort of inner healing intelligence that we talk about, that there's a quest for wholeness, a quest to integrate our parts together. And so where does that come from? It's unclear, but I think it comes from sort of this the origins of life, that people, that things want to be whole, they want to be connected. And so I think we throw away what our conscious mind wants to, and then this idea of this inner healing intelligence is really about just trust the process, that what comes up may be really painful, it may be something different than you completely expected, but there's a wisdom to it, an inner logic, and you just open up to that. And that's not something that you have to believe in necessarily, that there's this inner healing intelligence, but this idea is that when you're dealing with this emergence into awareness, that it was good actually that you started talking about right before you go to sleep, Bruce, so that we're all familiar with dreams. Dreams, where do dreams come from? Dreams are coming from, I would say, the same place that your psychedelic experiences come from. You know, when you're meditating, where do these ideas come from? Or where do these thoughts come from that you... It's all this inner place, and I think, and this is maybe one day Bruce and others can help us try to prove this scientifically, but my operating theory is that there is some form of collective unconscious, that we're all unified in some ways. And you talk about quantum mathematics and quantum physics, there is this way where we're all interconnected. So it's not been, I would say, conclusively proven, but I'm curious, how many people have had like an experience of learning something that they can't explain from their five senses, where you had some information come in some way? So I would say less than half of the people said that, but enough so that there is this sense that there is the opportunity to access information in other ways than we normally know. And I would say that there's some resonance, there's some collective unconscious that surrounds us that we're able to tap into. So I guess, Bruce, I'm curious how you see that.
Eat your mic.
Yeah, one of the ways we could pilot through this is beautiful work being done at Imperial College London on extended state DMT. And you've probably heard Andrew Gallimore talk about this, and there's work starting at UC San Diego, the whole thing. What it is intravenous infusion. And there's this bolus, and there's a saline solution, and you squeeze it in, and it's an hour and a half on pulses of the DMT experience, which is kind of our dream molecule. It's native to our system. It's endogenous and exogenous. This is amazing stuff. This is a potential breakthrough because they've gotten the dose critical studies have been done, and now people are going into piloting. So instead of smoking something and having this all come really rapidly and it's overwhelming, or taking ayahuasca and it's 6 or 7 hours and there's a lot of other processing, a lot of other things, this is a kind of straight up laser-like kind of probe into this amazing landscape, whether it be, formed with alien beings, all linked in their bodies or whatever. But it's going to be a tool that we can use that is not necessarily a huge number of side effects. So one of the things that Minds is doing is raising money from our donor base to bump these studies up. And there's a new center being established at University College London with 10 new studies, and 6 of them are creativity. So they're kind of breaking now into that mode of it's healthy person, DMT infusion, long journeys, longer and longer. New undiscovered country is going to come through that. So, watch this channel, tune to this channel. And it may end up becoming, and we've heard from people in drug delivery that are developing a DMT delivery patch of all things. So, stand by. There's just more coming.
Fantastic. Well, listen, folks, it's Chilly Willy, and I bet you want to get some tunes and some dancing going. So that'll for sure be happening. Want to really thank you all. And just to frame this up a little bit, just to bring it back into our world and our life, right? 1971, 73, somewhere in there, Henry Kissinger had been funding the Khampa Tibetan guerrillas against the Red Chinese. And when Nixon went to China, their policies suddenly switched. And Kissinger left a bunch of Khampa rebels high and dry in a mountain pass between Nepal and Tibet to get cut down. We have just done the same thing to the Ukrainians. We have pulled all US intelligence, we have pulled all funding, Starlinks may well get shut down as well, and we are leaving them to be slaughtered by Putin. Rick and MAPS are filling a void and coming in to provide therapy and therapists and psychedelic training for the people who are on the front lines, alleviating the trauma and heartache and heartbreak. So tonight is in service and benefit of us rallying together as American citizens, as general humans, to do the right thing and the best thing in the ways we can. And minds, yeah, fuck yeah, right? And in a world that is in desperate need of complex and novel solutions to a whole laundry list of problems of late-stage capitalism, right? Bruce and his colleagues are looking to accelerate and turbocharge our ability to innovate solutions that serve humanity indefinitely. So guys, big round of applause to Rick and Bruce for leading the way. Thank you guys all so much. Have a wonderful night. Be good to each other.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.